Over the years, 2K has had a lot of cheesy players. Whether it was Anthony Morrow spamming threes, Terrence Ross postering somebody into retirement, or Thon Maker running the point at 7'1". In 2K, we've seen a lot of cheesy players, and most of them, even though they play like stars in the game, were role players in real life. Guys who were solid at best, but in 2K, they were absolute demons. So today, we're looking at 10 role players who are way too cheesy in NBA 2K.
Hey, if you can't swim, you bound to drizzle.
Number 10.
At number 10, we have Alonzo G. If you played around 2K13, you already know this man was a problem, but loading into the game, you'd never even know. Because on paper, the dude was only a 70 overall. He was a small forward who had 88 speed, he could easily hit a 3 with a 79 rating, and he even had an 80 dunk. And he was way more dangerous than his overall showed. And in real life, he went undrafted in the 2009 draft, and he ended up starting off in the D-League, where he would eventually work his way up to a starting role with the Cavs. And that alone deserves so much respect. But over his NBA career, he never averaged more than 12 points per game, and he was never really even close to being an all-star. But in 2K13, he played like one, and he was easily one of the cheesiest low-rated players in the entire game. And Alonzo G was definitely some cheese, but who we have next straight up started cheesing his girlfriend at
Number 9.
At number 9, we got Swaggy P, aka Nick Young. And if you played older 2Ks, you already know exactly where this is going, because Nick Young in 2K has almost always been a demon. He was never a superstar, and he was usually sitting around a 70 to 80 overall, but in game, he always had a high 3-point rating with a jumper that felt way too easy. And in his days with the Wizards, he wasn't afraid to drive the lane and dunk on someone either, especially with how high 2K made his vertical. So catch and shoot, driving the lane, or pulling up from deep, this dude was a pure scorer, and definitely a problem every single time you played him. And when it came to real life, he was the 16th pick in the 2007 draft, and he was one of those players who would come off the bench, get hot, give you some quick points, and then that's it. And he also gave us some pretty hilarious boneheaded plays. But overall, he was mostly a solid player for his whole career, and I mean, the man was even lucky enough to play alongside Kobe. But in 2K, whether his jersey said Wizards or Lakers, Nick Young was always some cheese. But who we have next played like a poor man's Kobe at
Number 8.
At number 8, we've got Marshawn Brooks. In 2K, this dude was basically the homeless man's Kobe, simply because Marshawn Brooks was making everything. Whether it was a contested jumper or driving down the lane, he felt unstoppable. And 2K gave him shot creator, so he was making some crazy off-balance shots or post fades too, just like the real Kobe, except he was only a 73 overall and didn't even have good rating. But in game, it felt like they were in the 90s. In real life, Marshawn Brooks was the 25th pick in 2011, and even though he actually had a pretty good rookie season, he ended up averaging around 8 points per game for his career. But he'd have some random stretches where he'd completely go crazy, and that basically was Marshawn Brooks' career in a nutshell, because most of the time he was a role player, but every once in a while he had you thinking he was the next big thing. But in 2K, he was consistently cheese, and that's exactly why he belongs on this list. And Marshawn Brooks was pretty unstoppable, but who we have next was so cheese you could barely even stay in front of him at
Number 7.
At number 7, we have Jared Bayless. When you talk about mid-range gods in 2K, Jared Bayless should definitely come to mind, because in 2K, this man was an absolute cheat code. He was like a 70 overall with solid shooting, but his main strength, that was the mid-range, which was usually in the 90s. But then you look a little closer, that's when you also realize 2K gave this man a 93 layup, along with a 96 speed. So guarding this man was an issue altogether, because not only could he shoot and finish at the rim, but he also was one of the fastest players in the game, so you simply couldn't even stay in front of him. But in real life, Jared Bayless was a lottery pick in 2008, going 11th overall to the Pacers, and he was a pretty solid piece off the bench. He averaged around 8 to 9 points per game for his career, other than when he won that MVP in the 2008 Summer League. But in 2K, he had one of the cheesiest combos, and that was speed and shooting. And Jared Bayless was some cheese, especially for mid-range, but who we have next was a 66 overall, but still had one of the deadliest shots in the game at
Number 6.
At number 6, we've got Anthony Morrow. This is one of those players that probably most people found out through 2K, because if you didn't know who he was, you would definitely know by the end of that game. And in some of the older 2Ks, he was literally a 66 overall. So at first, you see him get subbed in, and then just start playing that whoever offense on him. But honestly, that was kind of a mistake, because even though his overall was trash, 2K gave him some of the best ratings when it came to shooting. He had an 88 mid-range and an 84 3, with a jumper that felt way too clean for someone rated that low. And on top of that, 2K gave him microwave, which was a signature skill where he could get hot quicker than normal. You'd look up and he's got 30 just off threes. And in real life, Anthony Morrow actually had a way more interesting career than most people remember. He went undrafted in 2008, but he would have random stretches where he would just come in and drop a ton of points at once. And at his peak, he was definitely one of the best pure shooters in the league. He even had a season where he shot 47% from 3, which is absolutely ridiculous. But even with all that, he was never a star, he was never a first option, and that's exactly why it felt so crazy when 2K made him a 66, but turned him into a bunch of cheese. But who we have next was basically a demigod at
Number 5.
At number 5, we have ThonMaker, and this one started before 2K even touched him. ThonMaker went viral for being 7'1" and looking like he could play guard. He could handle the ball, drive to the rim, and even had a jumper, so he got pretty hyped up. He ended up getting drafted 10th overall by the Bucks in the 2016 draft, but the idea of him next to Giannis had people pretty excited. But then he ended up just being another guy, having a career average of less than 5 points per game. But when you load him up in 2K, that's where he actually lived up to the hype. ThonMaker was only a 71 overall, but his ratings made no sense for his size, and that's what made him so cheese. He had a 74 three-pointer, 74 speed, and a 74 ball handle. So you've got a 7'1" big who's pretty damn fast for his size, can handle the ball, and even step out and shoot. And like I said, this man was basically a demigod in 2K. And even though he flashed potential in real life, he just never really became the guy people expected after all that hype. But in 2K, he was a mismatch that just felt way too cheesy. But who we have next is one of the cheesiest players ever at
Number 4.
At number 4, we've got Terrence Ross. And if you've used him in older 2Ks, you remember just how cheese this man really was. But when you looked at his ratings, that's where you started to notice. Because he always had a wet jump shot, and in some years, they gave him the best dunk rating in the entire game with a 96 dunk. And he was dunking on everyone. Guards, bigs, it didn't matter. And the animations, those were ridiculous. And you could literally run your entire offense through this man. Just give him the ball and everybody else get out of the way. And in real life, he was pretty solid. He was drafted 8th overall in the 2012 draft by the Raptors, and this man could jump out of the gym. And one of his most memorable moments was when he won the 2013 dunk contest. And we can't forget about that random night where he just went crazy and torched the Clippers for 51 points. But outside of that, he was mostly a solid rotational piece who could score if you needed him to. But in 2K, they took his athleticism and shooting and turned that man into one of the cheesiest players the game has ever seen. And Terrence Ross is pretty damn iconic for being cheese, but who we have next, he was giving people the work even when you were guarding him in MyCAREER at
Number 3.
At number 3, we have Marcus Thornton. And this is one of those players that never really looked scary because Marcus Thornton was usually around a 74 or 75 overall. But once you got in the game, you were immediately asking yourself if you're sure you saw a 75 because you simply could not guard this man. 2K gave him a smooth jumper, solid shooting stats, and tendencies that made him play way better than his overall showed. And the funniest part, he was just as cheese with the CPU. And don't take it from me, take it from Connor Murphy 141, who commented on my last video saying he remembers Marcus Thornton dropping multiple 40-point games on his head. So whether it was MyCAREER, Play Now, or MyTEAM, this man was always ready to give you the work. And in real life, Marcus Thornton had a pretty solid career. He wasn't drafted until the 2nd round in the 2009 NBA draft, going 43rd overall, and over his career, he averaged around 12 points per game, scoring over 11,000 points, so dude definitely did his job. But in 2K, this man had you fighting for your life every single time you played him, making him absolutely cheese. But who we have next was basically the dollar store LeBron at
Number 2.
At number 2, we have Terrence Williams. And in 2K, like I said, this man was basically the dollar store LeBron. And when you actually looked at his build, it started to make more sense. He was a 6'6" small forward with 92 speed, 92 vertical, and 92 dunk. And on top of that, he also had solid defense and a 71 three-pointer. So this man could literally do anything you needed, just like LeBron. Except he was only a 76 overall. But in 2K, Terrence Williams was the type of dude that you would build the whole team around because there was no wrong way to use him. If you wanted to be really cheese, you could run him at point guard, or you could just throw him the ball and just rim run the whole game. And in real life, Terrence Williams had flashes, but he could never really be that guy consistently. He was drafted 11th overall in the 2009 draft, so the talent, that was definitely there. But over his career, he averaged around 7 points per game, and despite the potential, he never quite reached the level most people expected. But in 2K, like I said, he was basically LeBron in disguise at a 76 overall, and that's exactly why Terrence Williams was super cheese. But who we have next was cheese until he retired at
Number 1.
At number 1, we've got Jeremy Lamb, and this man is definitely one of the GOATs when it comes to 2K cheese, because Jeremy Lamb came into the league cheese and somehow retired, maybe being the cheesiest he's ever been. You could spam threes with him, abuse his jumper, and almost every time they would go in. And the craziest part, as the years went on, his overall just kept going up, so you could keep cheesing with him all the way until he retired. So this man was basically cheese in every single 2K he was ever in. And in real life, Jeremy Lamb had a pretty solid career. He was drafted 12th overall by the Rockets in the 2012 draft, but then he got traded to the Thunder before the season even started because he was included in the trade that sent James Harden to the Rockets. He then went on to play 10 seasons in the NBA. And being in the league is hard enough, but being able to stay for a decade means you did your job pretty damn well. But in 2K, he was definitely the main scoring option on the team, and it felt like the man just couldn't miss. And that's why Jeremy Lamb is number 1, because most cheesy players had a moment or a year, but this man was cheese for a whole career. And that is 10 role players that 2K made way too cheesy. easy. As always, let me know in the comments who I forgot, because these lists could honestly go on for days. Other than that, thank you guys for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed. I appreciate you all, and in case you forgot,
Stay saucy.
Ever since I can remember, I've been popping my collar,